communists were stunned. They'd never seen a tank like this before. Nothing they had could stop it. The British designed, British built Centurion. Tearing up the steepest hills, this heavy metal monster seemed to defy gravity. More than 60 years later, the Cold War superstar is still a contender.
No other tank has fought in such diverse campaigns for quite so long.
Or inspired today's greatest battle tank.
Oh, here we go, another one. Ah!
On opposite sides of the Atlantic, from England to Canada, two tank crews are working to bring their Centurions back to full working order. But they're in for a long, tough tank overhaul.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
This holy trinity is the foundation of every great tank.
It's the best combination of firepower, manoeuvrability and protection that the British armour had had.
And the Centurion incorporated other innovations that made it a much safer tank. Instead of using hydraulic lines, which were highly flammable if hit in battle, the turret was powered electrically. As well, Centurion designers decided not to store the ammo in the turret. Instead, it was stored below the exposed turret in the tank's hull.
And so the chances of it being penetrated in battle was considerably diminished.
With all its innovations, the Centurion was a quantum leap forward for British tanks.
There's no two ways about it. If one compared the Centurion in 1945, when it actually came into service, with the Panther, which came into service in 1943, they were roughly comparable.
But the Centurion never went into battle facing German tanks.
It arrived in Germany in May 1945, virtually the day after the German capitulation.
The Centurion made up for missing World War II by lasting longer than all her rivals.
It's good to see that it was still being used in the Gulf War in '91.
It's still used to this day as a frontline tank in South Africa.
But the British have never been ones to sit back on their successes. They constantly strive to improve and remain a dominant military force.
The fact that all tanks in the British Army begin with the letter C, the Chieftain, the Challenger 1 and the Challenger 2, shows the evolutionary nature of the way tank design works in this country.
Building on this foundation of the Centurion's excellence is Britain's current main battle tank, the daunting Challenger 2.
I command Batters, which is the British Army training unit in Suffield, in Canada. It's the only place in the world we can come and fire all of our armoured vehicles in an integrated sort of combined way.
The ferocious Challenger 2 is Britain's main battle tank, 62 metric tons of rolling thunder. Powered by a Rolls-Royce V12 turbocharged diesel engine, it can reach almost 60 kilometers or 40 miles an hour. Boasting a 120mm gun, the Challenger can obliterate targets at over 5 kilometers or 3 miles away. Like the Centurion, this was built to be a universal tank. Some of its design features, the side skirts, the cast hull and turret, are also inspired by the Centurion.
It has outstanding firepower. Its armor protection is without parallel in the world.
I was commanding a battle group in Iraq 2 years ago now, and it absolutely not only saved
But this is no private playground. It's the museum of the Royal Canadian Armoured Corps Ontario Regiment. Like the Duxford crew, they are also working on a Centurion tank. Their tank is a Mark V-2 designation.
Restoring a tank is like eating an elephant. You do it one bite at a time.
Located in the industrial town of Oshawa, the museum has a modest collection of 8 tanks and 40 other vehicles. Frozen but unstoppable, the crew of volunteers are totally dedicated. Brian Budd works shifts as a foreman at a nuclear power station. Scott Boyd is a bricklayer, volunteer firefighter, and Brian's brother-in-law. Any chance they get, they are here moving mountains of steel, wire, and rust.
Well, we've got a Centurion that was built about 1952, and I've essentially have a puzzle box with no picture, and this is what I have to finish and restore and fix up. But I'll have to tear it down to pretty well almost right down to its bare hull if we can. Our biggest concern, though, is we can't take off the turret just because we don't have the facilities for it.
The job at Oshawa is just as big as the overhaul in Duxford, but this crew has to tackle it with a much smaller toolbox.
Hey, let's go.
The museum actually owns 2 Centurions. This gate guard is beyond salvage and is being used as a parts donor. The real museum piece is buried in snow out back, waiting for spring.
1, 2, 3.
There.
How long has this thing been sitting here?
Driven into place about 20 years ago.
I believe it.
Paddy fields, Korea was not ideal tank territory, but this tank couldn't have cared less.
Its ability to climb hills was phenomenal.
The Centurion could get up a steeper slope than any of the American vehicles there, and the Americans actually prized having the British armoured regiments nearby because they could basically get the Centurions on top of these very high hills to dominate the battlefield.
The Chinese lived in fear of this tank.
The Centurion's superb mobility was backed up by a ferocious gun and first-class armor. This triple threat was a perfect example of the Iron Triangle, essential to any great tank. The Duxford mission is not just about making a clean, pretty display. Everyone here is a serious historian. They want a specific tank that is historically accurate.
It looks complete, yes, yeah.
Mind my finger. There you are. We're there now. I told ya.
No move. Yes, that's moving. That's it. Right, we're off the threads.
Now watch the swing. Half past 2, we started this. What's the time now? 4:30, 2 hours. That ain't bad for getting the gun barrel 2 hours. Quality engineering.
With the 20-pounder almost in place on their Centurion, the crew is about to add a critical piece of their Mark III jigsaw puzzle. But there's still so much more they need to nail down.
What I have no knowledge whatsoever of is
Korean local modification instructions?
We need to talk to the veterans about that.
who would know that.
We've got representatives from both of the main tank regiments in Korea coming on Thursday.
Seeking first-hand knowledge on the Centurion, the Duxford crew is lucky there are still people around who know this tank better than they do.
Looks actually like brilliant. Oh, yes, yes.
Jack Ma, Kenneth Jones, Michael Swindells, Christopher Coldry. All four served in Korea, armed with the Centurion and its superb gun.
And this was this brand new magic tank. They were wonderful. The gun always pointed in the right direction, for example, with a thing called a stabilizer, so that as you went round, the gun stayed pointing in that direction, which was very clever of it, we thought.
In the fall of 19... British engineering still holds up. The gun fits like a glove.
It went in obviously as well as it ever did 40 years ago. It went in a lot easier than it came out. We're now back to what I believe would have been the original pattern, the A-type 20-pounder gun, as would have been fitted to the Mark III when it rolled out of the factory in 1949.
When you're restoring a tank from the Korean War, it helps to have spare parts. No one makes them anymore.
In theory, we have a complete Centurion in bits, apart from the hull and the running gear.
But not every tank crew has a warehouse of parts like the boys at Duxford.
Luckily, we have another Centurion parked out front of the museum that we can open up and establish parts from. And hopefully we don't have the same broken parts on it. So it's more of a case of salvage what you can, refurbish what you can, and if you can't, well, we have to do without or find some other way of, some other museum that's desperate to get rid of Centurion parts.
Yeah, we need some extra weight on that to pull it back.
Now, unfortunately, it's got nothing inside it, so it's pretty well gutted except for a drivetrain and a driver's seat, which means we can use it for pretty well all the parts we can.
In search of missing parts and possible treasures, Brian and Scott spend a Saturday afternoon in the small town of Acton at the Royal Canadian Legion Hall.
What's it going on, 25 bucks for?
I don't know, it says 25, thought that was 25 feet.
The big thing is to find whatever, mainly bits and pieces, like being a Centurion, parts are so specific, it's almost impossible to get something specific to a Centurion.
But every now and then, Brian's refusal to quit wins out.
Hey, Scott, I know that'll work off a 42 set, one of our radios.
Yep.
For the correct radio for the Centurion, and the thing's brand new. Like, wow. The whole idea is you have around your mouth when you're talking,
was a key part of the NATO arsenal. Over 4,400 were produced and sold around the world between 1946 and 1962, with 13 mark designations.